Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, the perfecter of the movable type printing press.
I have actually been oppressed for my entire life by the movable typeface because because I have a non-English character in my name. There was a point at which I had to email the University of Glasgow to make sure that they didn't put on my degree Aaron Prince -TAPP question mark.
It was, I think the people who had it worst in, uni were the people who, somehow their photos got, squashed on their student IDs.
Oh, God.
Do you remember you would sometimes just, see someone's student ID and their face would either be, really narrow or really squat?
Well, that's what my Glasgow Subway smart card looks like. It's the long Aaron.
Yes! Long pig.
I look like I've been through the stretching thing that they do at the end of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's what it's actually called.
Of course.
The feast is o'er. Now brimming wine in lordly cup is seen to shine before each eager guest. And silence fills the crowded hall, as deep as when the herald's call thrills in the loyal breast.
Words. They're everywhere. They're all over the damn place, aren't they? And basically every letter you ever lay your eyes upon nowadays in the Latin alphabet is the descendant of one medieval style of writing. This is crazy because, we have so many typefaces nowadays. We have so many different ways that we write, and they all convey things that are slightly different. I think we would all agree that the style that we read letters in, it tells us something about the words that isn't just contained in their physical meaning or in their literal meaning, right? If you hand in your resume in Comic Sans, that's going to create a much worse impression than if you handed it in papyrus, which will make them think, wow, this guy has a classics degree.
This guy is really worldly.
Exactly.
I know SNL did this 10 years ago, but it is incredible to me that the title card for Avatar, the original Avatar, not later Avatar movies, original Avatar, one of the biggest movies of all time, it's just papyrus.
Yeah, it is. It is. And what is, papyrus? What is any font? What is it about these different fonts that makes them feel so distinctive and almost gives the words an audible voice that they're speaking to you in? The truth is, all these stylistic elements come from what were originally very, cultural and utilitarian elements of writing, both handwriting and physical, metal type printing. And the way that these letters speak to us from the page is an artifact of how all these different letter forms were created and how they grew and differentiated from each other, the same way that, we all grew and differentiated from one amoeba type guy 5 billion years ago. So everyone's genome tells a story about how they got to where they are. All of these letters tell us a very interesting story about how they got to our faces. And that story for us is going to start with an illiterate German named Karl.
Carolus Magnus.
Big Karl, as they call him.
Do they call him that?
Well, in Germany, he's Karl der Grosse.
Fat Chuck.
I hate to say it, because, he wasn't French, but I can see why in English language speaking schools they call him Charlemagne.
They call him Fat Chuck.
Yeah, they call him Big Chuck. His empire was massive.
One of the biggest. Anyway, quick Charlemagne primer. He's a warlord, Frankish warlord in the primordial soup of late 8th century Central European politics. He gets to the top of the totem pole by beating all the other kind of guys around him who are like him into submission and fashioning a big clanking contraption of an empire that then gets ennobled with the title of Holy Roman Empire by the Pope when he saves the Pope from a bunch of Lombards.
Yep, those pesky Lombards. As you can imagine, when Charlemagne comes to power in Europe, reaches the height of his power, He's inherited a Europe that is very fragmented after the sort of dissolution of the Western Roman Empire. Things have, like, really gone to seed. It's like when you know, go on holiday for, like, a month and you come back and your garden has gone kind of nuts. Things have just been left to grow a little bit wild. Europe is broadly Christian. Charlemagne is going to have to do some sort of, some gentle encouraging of the Saxons to get them to embrace Christianity as well. But even though everyone is sort of on the same page that, like, God exists, the church exists, these things are good.
Well, in Western Europe, these weird things are happening in Eastern Europe.
Well, yeah, we're talking about Charlemagne's, empire.
And also there are Muslims in Europe.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Central Europe, not everybody's Christian, but most people are, but also they're doing weird Christian things.
Yeah,
and they don't agree about what Christianity is anymore.
Well, yeah, and then the church, is okay with a certain amount of weirdness, as long as it's kind of in service of the overall church mission. But what you saw during this period in the late 8th century was, like, nobody knew what was going on anywhere. There was, like, very little correspondence between all of these different regional parishes and authorities and clergy with Rome. I mean, a lot of, like, regional clergy and local churchmen just, like, couldn't read or write.
Oh, yeah.
Also, like, Latin has kind of stopped existing in, like, a practical sense, in that, like, people have started to speak things that could be considered sort of frightening things like Spanish and French.
Or Portuguese.
And what this means is that, Latin is the language of the church, because it's the language of the Vulgate Bible. We won't even get into what that is. Google it if you care that much.
Nerd.
But, nerd. Google it if you care about medieval history, nerd. But, like, now it's like, why are people, like, saying their prayers in, like, weird French? Like, no. And Charlemagne realizes that by playing ball with the church and fostering a unified church, that's going to be a pretty big step to, like, keeping the church on his side, but also, like, keeping the whole sort of ship together.
Yeah, because Charlemagne has inherited the title of Roman Emperor, but he's not inherited any of the actual kind of governing apparatus of the Roman Empire, except the church, really.
Yeah, he doesn't have the Mongol golden rod that makes people, like...
respect you?
Yeah, it makes people kiss your ass. So, that's what he does. He basically assembles a sort of crack team, like Ocean's 11 style, of all of the best guys from around Europe. All the best, most Christian, smartest, most learned, most renowned guys. And he's like, guys, come to Aachen. We're all going to hang out. We're all going to define what Christianity is, and also, like, what education is fundamentally. And it's going to be, like, we're so back. Rome is so back.
We're going to, you might say, rev turn.
And you've had all sorts of different churchmen who have been preserving various classical texts and scholarship, and who have been, keeping a less grammatically altered version of Latin alive, and things like that. And so he has all of these people come to his court in Aachen to bring their skills and their expertise and their regional wisdom. And they basically just, like, pool it all together in a big kitty. And are like, we can do this. We can just reconstruct, like, Rome, but we're going to make it Christian. It's going to be better, but we're going to have all of, like, the, political authority and stability and, like, importantly, intellectual and cultural and artistic output.
There's a massive irony about that, which is who are the people who are actually engaged in this process. They are not people, or what, they are not from cultures who are part of the core Roman, like, world. No. They got a bunch of Irish people who notably were not ever Romans, and then a bunch of... and then the chief guy is just an English guy.
He's from Yorkshire.
Hey, oh.
But this is where Christianity and cultural output have been flourishing, is almost sort of counterintuitively on the, quote, fringes of the empire, of the former Roman Empire. And we've already talked a bit about the incredible productivity of Irish monks, and eventually their little friendos, the English monks, in basically making, like, some of the most ornate and elaborate art and some of the most beautiful manuscripts, some of the most beautiful typography and calligraphy of the Middle Ages. I mean, go look up the Book of Kells. It's gorgeous. These guys have been keeping the good stuff alive.
I think they must have made it look like that because they were on drugs.
That's true, actually.
That is such an insane shot for me to take for an article that I'm just in The Guardian that I'm mad at 3 years later.
And I still see it everywhere.
Not to be sound like a Christian camp counselor, but I'm sorry, they were possessed by an ecstasy, and unfortunately, it was the ecstasy of Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, that is a thing. I know the secular mind struggles to understand this, but
exactly.
You know the way you feel when you look at a really cool sunset? It's that.
They're on LSD. Loving saints, dude.
We went on a weird cul-de-sac about the Book of Kells.
Yes.
Calligraphy, Irish calligraphy.
Yeah. And so one of the big guys that comes to Aachen is Elquine of York, who is, in the words of Einhard, Charlemagne's biographer, the most learned man of his day. So yeah, that is where the big smarties are coming from. Yorkshire. Yep. I mean, yep. And so Elquine is put in charge of Charlemagne's court school and in charge of the scriptoria, and he goes about reforming Latin and sort of correcting some of the grammatical issues in the scriptures which have been translated to Latin and stuff like that. He tries to teach Charlemagne how to read and write. Charlemagne apparently never really gets the hang of it, so Einhard writes about Charlemagne keeping, it's really sad actually, keeping a wax tablet and a stylus under his pillow so he can do his letters before he goes to bed.
But
he's
Duolingo.
Not good at it. It's so sad, man.
He had other talents.
He did. Hopefully he wasn't too bothered. But maybe it was because, he couldn't write good that he realized not being able to write good is something that holds you back.
Yeah.
But anyways, one of the things that was quickly became clear as a stumbling stone was not just that Latin and education and all these other things had sort of begun to diverge, but also handwriting had begun to diverge. And that was a big practical issue. I mean, no one likes to look at chicken scratch. And, a lot of the time we look at, old handwriting and we think, oh, wow, it's amazing people back then could read this. But actually, a lot of the time they couldn't. A lot of the time they absolutely could not. Specific types of handwriting were made for, doctors or lawyers or whatever. And, no one else could read them. And even though, everyone was using the Latin alphabet, there were all these different conventions and letter shapes.
And by the way, in the other half of the Christian world, which is the Greek-speaking half of the Christian world, the exact same shit is happening.
Yep.
Which makes cultural transmission between the Latin and Greek halves of Europe even more difficult. You're like, well, that kind of looks like an A.
Exactly. And so Elquine and the other scholars at Charlemagne's court begin to sort of contribute towards a style of handwriting that basically synthesized together all of these pre-existing styles of handwriting. So it basically kind of almost averaged out a lot of the regional styles because the idea was to create something that would be legible anywhere across Europe. And that was the vision for a Europe unified in Christianity, unified by shared rights and shared customs and shared traditions. The scriptures would be the same everywhere. They would look the same everywhere. Every churchman could read them. And, if you're a lawyer or you're writing court records or inventories or whatever, you don't need to care about this. It has nothing to do with you. It was purely about creating the appropriate vessel and a useful and also beautiful vessel for the scriptures and for scholarship, as well for classical texts. It was meant to be the vessel for the language and the intellectual movement of international scholarship.
Because I think it's very interesting that we think about handwriting now as being something that's very personal. It's all, we literally have, we obviously have signatures, but obviously we observe things about our own handwriting, about how other people write. And I think that one of the reasons why we are able to have that, we are able to have that sort of indulgence of being able to have our own very personalized handwriting is because we are broadly not relying on that as a way to transmit most of our information.
Yes.
you can ultimately, type something up. Which does not exist here because that's not a legible sentence in 9th century Germany.
Yes, exactly. And importantly, like, if, in Christianity, the scripture is God, the word is God. Mm-hmm. And so everyone should, have a unified idea of what God is, and God should be beautiful and legible. And so the script that resulted from this sort of collaboration was called, or is called in the modern day, Carolingian minuscule. I think back then, I don't know what they called it, handwriting.
Called it regular.
And so again, this is what we call a bookhand, because it's made for, books, as opposed to, like, again, any other kind of documents or records. And it's called minuscule because it had lowercase letters, which was a pretty new invention. It had already existed for some time, but, the Romans didn't really have lowercase letters. They had square capitals.
That's why it always looks like they're yelling.
Exactly. And this was, very heavily based on existing sort of Latin writing styles and continental writing styles, but there were also a lot of influences from the insular British and Irish court scholars. So the spaces between words was something that was kind of pioneered by Irish monks. So putting spaces between words was not something that was really commonly done, or was not uniformly done before this Carolingian minuscule became the international style of writing. Otherwise, when you see, like, Roman inscriptions, sometimes they do a dot, but, like, if you see a page of Roman handwriting, it's basically, like, there's no spaces anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's really intimidating to look at, actually. And yeah, these were, like, influences that have been kind of creeping into local handwriting styles. So this was, Carolingian minuscule was a style that was, like, it was meant to be spacious and sort of balanced, and it was meant to kind of eliminate all of these cursive elements and all of these sort of elements that cause text to run together. So it's very light, airy, beautiful looking.
And I think if you look at sort of insular styles of writing from Britain and Ireland, you can see that it looks a lot like what we now kind of scan as quote-unquote Celtic fonts, which speaks to... Which is it's sort of misleading, because obviously there's a style that's used in England as well. So it's like Germanic speaking people are doing this too. But it's interesting, isn't it, that now this style has sort of been imbued with this very particular idea of place and identity, informed by 19th century nationalism.
Very much so, because, these handwriting styles were all used to write in one language, which was Latin. So actually writing, in Gaelic or in Old English in these styles would have been really weird and upsetting to people back then. It was like, no, that's supposed to be chicken scratch. So again, this is about creating an elevated register for Latin and for scripture. And that all doesn't work if you try to write your, like, weird regional language in it. Yuck.
There's too many G's and H's.
Yeah, well, exactly. And yeah, one thing we got, for instance, from this insular style of writing was the lowercase m and n. So thank you, Irish and English monks.
Wait, I didn't quite hear you. You said Irish monks invented M&Ms.
They invented M&M, Marshall Mathers, the rapper.
Fuck you. I was so ready to patronize you there. Womp, womp, womp.
Marshall Mathers would be like, that's like in another world, that's just like a Robin Hood character.
Oh, yeah.
I
would say, the persona of Eminem is a very, like, he's a sort of Raymond the Fox-like character.
Maybe, yeah.
He shows up, speaks in rhyme, and outwits much more powerful foes.
Actually, you know what? With that, you have convinced me. You're so right. And so this elevated register was at the center of manuscript production, and Charlemagne's court had a very productive scriptorium. They made some absolutely gorgeous manuscripts. They made manuscripts that were like where the parchment was dyed purple and they were written with gold ink.
Nice.
Absolutely beautiful. And
sexy.
This was the handwriting style that was used in these types of luxurious manuscripts, and it was one piece in the big puzzle of trying to sort of rebuild a classical heritage and rebuild a sort of collective, sort of broader Western European intellectual identity. So it was part of what we call the Carolingian Renaissance nowadays, which refers to the kind of elevated level of artistic and cultural and intellectual output that was very much inspired by ancient Rome and ancient Greece, that took place sort of during and in the centuries after Charlemagne's reign, where people were making extremely naturalistic sort of Roman-style paintings and illustrations in books. And they were building houses with domes, because that's super Roman, right? The dome. Romans loved a dome. They loved a square column. Like, they loved their blocky shapes. And they were using this handwriting style to write down all of the fun little books that everyone had brought from their home to Aachen. Like, oh, that's so cool, you brought some Plato. Let's write that down in a Latin translation using Carolingian minuscule. Now everyone can read it.
Yeah.
Huzzah.
And two observations about this. Number one, I just want to point out what is that you mentioned a manuscript with purple parchment, and what is the symbolic what does purple symbolize?
It symbolizes royalty.
Specifically Roman emperors in particular. That's
yes.
Yeah. So, subtle. But more broadly, I think it's very important to note that where Aachen is not?
In the historic heartlands of the Roman Empire?
Exactly.
What? I thought Caesar loved to go to Oktoberfest. Exactly. So it was very much a transfer of power, or a change in the
2
center
pints, Brutus.
of power. Yeah, exactly. 5 pints. Sorry, that joke only works in person. Anyways.
The 5 of pints.
Is this your card? Yes! But that was okay because, this idea had existed since the Roman Empire, since the ancient days of yore, of the translatio imperii. The translation, or rather, transference of power. Like, when one empire goes away, all of that power actually, escapes into the ether and goes not into the ether, but it goes up and it inhabits a different empire. So, there's always a natural successor from one empire to the next. And now it's the Carolingians. Yippee! As the little German boys say, yippee! Now I can play cards and drink beer. So yeah, it's all fine and dandy, and thankfully, they did restore that level of unity that Rome had, and it never went away. And that's why we all speak Frankish.
End of the episode. Nothing bad ever happens to the Carolingians.
Yep. Anyways, sort of carrying forwards our thread about Carolingian minuscule, again, I think it's fair to say it is quite a beautiful style of handwriting. I mean, if I go to my bookshelf...
Oh, she's doing Foley now.
No, it's not Foley if it's visual.
Well, it's not visual for them.
Well, yeah, fair, but I'm not planning on making a noise. And if I show you this book, which is set in a sort of what we would call a Gothic font, a sort of medieval-ish font, it's about the Middle Ages, versus this edition of Molière, which someone has written in superb in the front cover, but is a 1985 edition. Which would you say Carolingian minuscule more resembles, the medieval font or the Molière 1985 font?
So this is a trick question, but the medieval font has too many straight lines in it. It's pointy.
Exactly.
The Molière font is it's nice, it's curvaceous.
And which one looks more like Carolingian minuscule?
Molière.
Yeah. And so that's quite interesting, because the Carolingian minuscule is very legible to us even today. It was such a well-designed style of writing that we really haven't changed it very much at all. So it's funny that we went through a lot of BS to get to that point where we decided, actually, no, that is the best font. Because the next thing that happened was unfortunately not the continued unity and well-being of the empire. It was the Gothic movement.
Well, a bunch of, sad women with bangs.
Yeah, sad women with bangs went to Rome. And
They do that sometimes.
They do. I mean, yeah, Rome has them. They're there.
Not as many as Bologna.
No, certainly not. The Gothic movement. So, I mean, yeah, what do you think of when I say, like, Gothic art, Gothic, blah, blah, blah?
I think of flying buttresses.
Yes,
I think
good
of
job.
pointy cathedrals.
Yes.
I think of just sort of an ambient sense of, like, Germanic, like, stoicism.
Yes, you're so real for that, and correct, and historical and historiographical. So everything was going fine in the Carolingian era, Renaissance, until goth girls came and made the writing weird. And they made the windows pointy on top. And
They do like stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly, they do.
They like having Tumblr.
Yes, exactly, and believe me, those fragile spires were tumbling down in heavy winds. And they made, what else did they do? They made cathedrals, like, really tall in general. Like,
Yeah.
you go in and there's, like, a lot of vertical space.
Yes.
It makes you feel quite frightened, the way goth girls often do. The effect that goth girls have.
They make me scared.
No, but I mean, to give a, I think hopefully you're sort of familiar with the visual elements of Gothic art and architecture.
Pointy. Sharp.
Tall.
Buttresses.
You pervert!
Hey, there's one thing I know about goths is they have great buttresses.
And this was a style that I would say, like, northern France was the real heartland of the Gothic movement, but it was also sort of throughout France and England where this style was pioneered.
French goths. Because they'll be meaner than regular goths. Because they're French.
Yeah, but don't forget about, like, the Lincolnshire Goths, who will kill you.
I mean, pointing at it, speaking of tall churches, fucking Lincoln Cathedral, tallest building for, like, it was the tallest building built since the pyramids.
Yes.
It was insane.
It was the tallest building from when it was built to when it fell down. During those years, it was unmatched. Anyways, and it's quite funny, isn't it, that we call it Gothic. Goths, who were the Goths? They were like a Iron Age tribe, weren't they? They lived in, like, Switzerland or something. They lived in Germany or something.
Yes.
And Germans didn't invent this style of art. I mean, they got into it eventually.
But we'll get
into
into that.
A bit behind the curve. I mean, we talked in our universities episode about how, like, Germans were a bit behind the curve in these things, educationally, culturally.
This does feed into my ongoing, like, cultural observation that Germany and most of the other countries in Central and, like, Western continental Europe are, like, exactly 10 years behind the Anglosphere culturally.
Yes.
Like, it is 2016 over there right now.
Oh, yes.
Those hats have,
like,
some wide brims.
3 square miles of Berlin. In which it is 2036. And so it's by, the High Middle Ages, the aptly named High Middle Ages, that this towering style reaches its peak.
Womp womp.
Womp, 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 womp. And I would say, in general, it's a style defined by huge amounts of visual ornamentation. You have, like, these buildings with every square inch has, like, a floral carving or an ornament
or a statue of a guy.
It's a very, very representative style as well, very figurative style. There's always guys, and
there's fewer guys now with them than there used to be because we knocked all the guys out during various reformations. But they're supposed to. All those plinths are supposed to have guys in them.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can see the outline of the guys.
Yeah. It's funny, like, if you think about how in, like, Leuven in Belgium and, like, in Brussels as well, and, like, the Grand Place, like, some of the Gothic buildings had, like, niches built for statues, but the statues weren't put in till the 19th century. And it's funny to think about, like, the 17th, 16th, maybe even 18th centuries as, like, a real statue low point,
Oh, yeah. We were not about statues for a while.
Exactly. Anyways, Where were we on this?
Goths.
Statues.
Buttresses.
What was I saying directly? Oh, yes. And Carolingian minuscule, which, had previously, for a couple centuries after its sort of creation, enjoyed this heyday where it was used all over the place. It was used, again, like we said, very luxuriously, very refinedly, in lots of gospel books and prayer books and Bibles, and it was always done super tastefully with, again, very Romanesque, very Roman-inspired paintings of columns, paintings of arches, so lovely. And manuscripts had also, in line with the Gothic tradition in Northern Europe especially, become super, super decorative and ornamentational. What had started as this tradition of creating big illuminated initials at the start of sentences and paragraphs and chapters had completely spilled over the boundaries of the actual text into the margins, and the decoration had become completely detached from the text. Both visually, thematically, that's where we get a lot of our weird medieval guys from, are this era of Gothic excess, not to use a sort of stigmatizing word. What originally started as a way of beautifying the written word became almost something that felt like it overshadowed the written word.
Gothic excess is usually what I get up to on a Saturday night in Camden.
How many Gothic jokes are you gonna make, Aaron?
Until we get out of this segment, I don't know.
I'm gonna give you 12 more. I should give you a punch card. Yeah, you would love a Gothic punch card, wouldn't you? Get one
free at the ninth one.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Interesting.
And this same sort of dynamic had played out, in the written word itself, in that this lovely sort of proportional, rounded, as some people might describe it, Carolingian. Stop nodding! We're not talking about women, we're talking about the word of God and the written word and the scholarship. Aaron,
I didn't say anything. I'm nodding to agree with you.
Yeah, but you had a kind of
dreamy expression.
You had a somewhat detached expression on your face, as if you were thinking not of the cold hard facts of Gothic art, but don't smile again.
Okay, no more comedy.
No more comedy.
This
is not a funny podcast. This is a serious podcast.
That's true. Anyway,
right. So everything had gotten all spiky, and that's again, calling this all Gothic is a bit of a historical term, because people at the time were not calling it Gothic.
The Goths have disappeared.
Yeah, again, the Goths were a tribe of weird Swiss people that disappeared long before even Charlemagne. Even as Charlemagne was in power, the Goths, the Gothic language, which was its own language, they had their own script as well, I believe, and it was all completely it's long ceased to be a culturally or linguistically productive or extant culture or group of people. But
they got distracted making lots of little clocks.
Exactly. But anyways, we're calling it Gothic because there isn't really a better, I would say, word, a more useful word if we're going to try to get people to understand what we mean. So anyways, when you think of these sort of extremely ornate sort of medieval letters that are composed almost entirely of straight up and down strokes, they almost kind of resemble a Gothic skyline, don't they? Because they have a strange sort of vertical rhythm, and they're very spiky. There's a big emphasis on sort of almost like a visual harmony at the expense of actually being able to read it.
Oh no, it's for aesthetes. It's like a real. It's difficult to read.
Yeah, people love to tell you about how the dots on the I's were invented because we had all of these styles of writing where if you wrote the word minimum, it would just be a series of vertical strokes. Because there was a lot of overlapping of letters, there was a lot of abbreviation, and over the course of the Middle Ages, especially in England and France, all of these reforms and little polishes that have been put on handwriting by the Carolingians just completely went by the wayside. And now, looking at handwriting, if you look at a French or the most luxurious French and English manuscripts from the 14th, 15th century, they're so hard to read. They're just not that legible. And kind of strangely, the most expensive, most time-consuming, most luxurious styles of writing were the most illegible.
Conspicuous consumption strikes again.
Yes, indeed.
Making something pointlessly ornate and complicated in a way that is directly orthogonal to its function, because you can afford to buy something that was harder to make, and you have the taste and also the time to read something that is just an assault on the eyes. That makes you better than me. And it does.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite medieval manuscripts is the Sherborne Missal. It's in the British Library, and it's actually, look up the Sherborne Missal. It's from Sherborne. It's an English manuscript from, I think, the early 15th century. It's actually famous for its extremely lifelike depictions of birds, but it's also quite famous.
This is sick.
It's really cool. It's amazing. And every single page is like its own world of this incredibly ornate, sort of extremely geometric script and these extremely elaborate margins that are filled with life and filled with lifelike scenes. And
it is giving me a headache, however.
It's one of the only manuscripts where we know the name of the artist and the name of the scribe through their signatures. So most medieval manuscripts were not signed by the people that made them, but we know that this one was written by, I actually don't remember the names, but we know the name of the scribe because he signed his name in 3 different places, including an inscription that said, "I really didn't enjoy doing this. I had to spend a lot of time on it and my back hurts." And then the artist as well put in little portraits of himself alongside portraits of the patrons and the donors who helped fund it. And he even did there's one that's my favorite, that's a little portrait of him and the scribe kneeling together and praying. And
pray that this will be over soon.
You know it's them because he put little banners under them with their names. I mean, these guys were clearly extremely keen to get their flowers.
Yeah, and these are incredible birds. I know this isn't the point, but
no, they're amazing.
They're very lifelike. It's a very realistic style.
The woodcock is the best one. Did you see the woodcock?
Yes.
It's that is a woodcock.
They got a woodpecker. They got a kingfisher in here.
Yeah.
God damn.
It's all native English birds mostly. I think there's a peacock, but whatever.
Love me some native English birds. You thought I was done. I'm not.
Native English Gothic birds. My 4 favorite words. But it was excessive, right? And the point where, your scribe is crying and your artist is "Please notice me, daddy. I had to draw so many lifelike birds." And it's wait, this is a prayer book. What does God think about this?
He thinks it's sick.
That was one perspective. But over down in Italy, unfortunately, people were not quite so keen to embrace this truly excessive, almost grotesquely excessive style of art.
Not that you can't find Gothic cathedrals in Italy, just to be clear.
No, you certainly can, and there are
Before any of the Milanese start militating.
No, I mean, well, they built one truly Gothic cathedral, which is the Duomo in Milan, and then they looked at it and were we're so disgusted
We're not doing
with ourselves.
This again.
What's wrong with us?
Can I take us on a quick detour that's completely unrelated, just about Italian cathedrals? So a couple of weeks ago, from when we were recording this, I went on an extended trip around Italy. It was
your grand tour.
It truly was my grand tour. I went to 7 cities in 8 days, and one of the highlights was Bologna and the Bologna Cathedral, which is unfinished and has been unfinished. This is true for 400 years. Mm-hmm. They just stopped at a certain height. So you get it's beautiful marble, and then above a certain height, it's literally just the exposed brickwork.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have, again, certain Gothic elements that do make their way to Italy. So, I mean, stained glass, obviously, still quite a big thing down there. And you have, a pointed arch occasionally, some flying buttresses, perhaps. But, the spire, for instance, the big tall spire, not really a thing. And there still is, I think, a clear difference you can see in the Gothic buildings of Italy, in that they still do adhere to these kind of more consolidated Gothic, pre-Gothic, Romanesque forms. There's still domes. There's still kind of these big square, boxy buildings.
It's a dome. You can divide Christian Europe into the dome countries and the spire countries very clearly.
Yeah. And the same dynamic kind of played out in handwriting, in that Carolingian minuscule was obsolete by the sort of, High Middle Ages, but you still had a slightly different version of handwriting. It was called rotunda, which is a really good name.
Yeah.
So whereas, like, the sort of most elaborate French and English styles would be called textura quadratus, which means square text, this was rotunda, which means round text. So it's like round Gothic text. It's quite cute. And it still looks like kind of if you drew like Times New Roman with a calligraphy pen, a little bit.
Any round Goths out there,
Any Gothic rotundas want to hit us up? I'm going to have to edit like at least a couple of these out. But that's okay. I don't mind.
You just pick, I'm going to do 12. You pick the best 3.
I'll send you a reel. I'll cut them all together.
Oh no, when we do our next outtakes episode, we could just do the oops all goth jokes. Play them in a row.
Definitely. I was thinking what's going to be the humor element here in this episode. But yeah, I was foolish for thinking it would be anything
We would say the word Gothic 15 times.
Gothic. My name is Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway.
Never in danger, quail our fathers, free and undaunted.
And, I mean, there is no doubt that practicality went by the wayside in kind of all aspects of the Gothic movement. I mean, you have these big, tall spires. They're very inspiring, no pun intended, but they also fall down in heavy winds. You have these beautiful sort of bits of tracery and these flying buttresses and all of these incredible structures that seem to defy gravity, but they're also
eventually don't.
Yeah, eventually they don't, and they're full of all of these bits of ornamentation, like, monkeys with asses on their faces and faces on their asses. And so I think that by virtue of being the people who had always stayed closer to their classical roots, to the Roman heritage from which this Carolingian tradition that was sort of eventually forgotten had been derived, the Italians never did quite forget Rome because they were living in it. And they never really did embrace the spires and the, sort of most extreme bits of the whole style. And they were the first people to kind of be like, actually, I don't really like this anymore. I mean,
I thought we were rev turning and now we're doing something else.
Yeah, exactly. It's been 400 years. Why haven't we rev turned yet? They were getting sick of all those nasty northern letters and northern buildings and stuff. And they didn't see it as, like, theirs. And especially as we get into the late 14th and the 15th centuries, and we see the rise of the movement that we call humanism. Well, we call it that because it puts its emphasis on human minds and human bodies and what the human is capable of when they're given tools and free will. And that seemed extremely antithetical to the Gothic movement, which almost felt like anti-human to people, because it's these buildings that, you have these huge towering spires that look, really intimidating from the outside. They don't actually add anything to the inside of the building. You can't see the spire when you're in there worshipping. Right?
Sometimes you can see, sometimes in Ely you can see the big weird bit in the middle.
That is true. But
I love the
spires,
folks. We love the Ely Octagon.
Yeah, we do love the Ely.
But you know what the Ely Octagon did?
Collapse.
Yeah, it fell down, didn't it?
Exactly. And you have these, extremely elaborate, extremely detailed carvings and murals and paintings in these buildings, but there's so many of them and the buildings are so big you can't even really see them properly.
Yeah.
And on the page you have these styles of handwriting that are so elaborate, but you can't actually really read them. And to a movement that is called humanism, This was the philosophical opposite of what they were going for. It was, again, felt almost anti-human.
It's obtuse.
Yes. And so, as especially Italian scholars began to experience something of a renewed interest in their classical roots and in their ancient heritage, this style began to grate on them more and more. And we can, I think, sort of start talking about this humanist movement with our goat, Petrarch.
Who is Petrarch?
He was a 14th century Italian writer and, sort of a proto-Renaissance guy. I mean, I think probably...
I would say he was an early Renaissance guy. Renaissance things have started happening
in
by
Italy,
the 14th century.
So sort of at the vanguard of this Renaissance humanist movement. And he writes in, I think, 1364, to Boccaccio, another famous Italian writer, that he is really excited because a copy of one of his works is being made, and it's not in ugly, calligraphic, pointed-ass writing. It's in what he calls lettura antiqua, old letters.
Ah.
And so we see these Italian writers rediscovering the old Carolingian styles of writing, which they correctly identify as being sort of derived from Roman styles of writing.
A sort of new Rome, if you will.
Yeah, a rebirth. And they're like, oh, this is so much better. Why were the Germans keeping this from us?
Because as you well know, there's nothing that Germans love more than creating systems and styles that are deliberately obtuse and meant to befuddle and stress out anybody who interacts with them.
Of course. And again, never mind that, Germans hadn't actually invented much of this Gothic stuff.
And also
this so-called Gothic stuff.
And also hadn't fully invented being German yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's calling them Germans is a little bit anachronistic, but...
So yeah, here's a quote from a letter by Petrarch, and he complains of, quote, copyists who pride themselves on small, cramped lettering that baffles the eye by heaping and cramming everything together. Their writing confuses the spacing and piles up the letters as though they were riding on the top of one another, so the scribe himself could scarcely read them. Do not smile and nod at Goths writing on top of one another. While the patron who commissioned the book would really purchase not so much a book as blindness because of the book.
Yeah.
And he's like, no one can read this. And there's a reason why he thinks this.
It's because he's 60.
He's 60 years old, and he's like, I'm too old for this. Yeah. And one of his friends, a few decades later, basically says the same thing. And so it's quite endearing, I think, that we have these two crotchety old men, and they're like, no one can read this, and they're the guys who really have to be like, no, but seriously, I cannot read this. We see these preferences revealed in their own libraries, their personal libraries, because 1/3 approximately of the manuscripts owned by both of these men were from the 12th century or earlier, which would have been quite unusual. But these guys were collectors of the old, and they wanted to curate and cultivate their collections of old things and their sense of what the ancient world had been and bring themselves closer to it.
Which is exactly one of the reasons why we call the Renaissance the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. Because just like the Renaissance of Carolus Magnus, it's about returning to an idea of Rome.
Yes, it's very aesthetically motivated. So I
not
don't mean
Rome as it was, but their idea of Rome.
Exactly, because it's not. I think it would be misleading to say it was all practical. I mean, even Petrarch himself was quite sort of an aesthete. So one of my favorite things I learned about him when I was reading for this episode was that he would draw portraits of classical authors in the manuscripts of their works, but he would draw them styled as sort of portrait bust sculptures.
That's cute.
Even though the sculptures didn't exist. But he was obviously the right way to observe the face of a classical author is as a classical sculpture bust. So he would just invent these imaginary sculptures. And I would say actually there was a degree of sort of transferring their materialism onto, like, what was seen as a more sort of safe and, like, intellectually honest thing to be materialistic about, you know? Which was, like, books and learning and all of the trappings of classical scholarship, which is quite funny. So I also read a quote by Petrarch that was a response to one of his peers sending him a manuscript of Homer in the original Greek. But Petrarch could not read Greek. But he said, "Alas, your Homer has no voice for me, or rather, I have no ears for him. Yet the mere sight of him rejoices me, and I often embrace him, and sighing over him, I say, 'Oh, great man, how much I wish I could hear you.'"
That is how I feel when I watch The Simpsons.
Now, Petrarch himself does not change his handwriting that much. That honor is left up to Poggers. Which is my name for Poggio Bracciolini, who was one of the most influential scholars in that he essentially redefined handwriting for the Middle Ages, for the Renaissance. And he was kind of obsessed with, he and his friend Niccolo Niccoli
Brilliant
were kind
name.
of obsessed with handwriting in a way that clearly, like, pissed off some of their mates, because, like, we have this quote from Guarino da Verona, who says, "Neglecting the other aspects of books is quite superfluous. Niccolo expends his interest and acumen on the points or dots in the manuscripts. As to the lines, how accurately, how copiously, how elegantly he discusses them. You would think you hear Diodorus or Ptolemy when he discusses with such precision that they should be drawn rather with an iron stylus than a leaden one. As to the paper, that is the surface, his expertise is not to be dismissed, and he displays his eloquence in praising or disapproving of it. What a vacuous way to spend so many years if the final fruit is a discussion of the shape of letters, the color of paper, and the varieties of ink."
It is a genuine tragedy that this man was born hundreds of years before the invention of Reddit. Because I think he would have been very happy there.
Yeah, I know. It is very funny, but it was quite, you know, hate to say it, it was quite a LARP to all of these Renaissance scholars, because we hear about how these same two guys who were quite influential in pushing back against Gothic writing styles and kind of returning to this Carolingian and this pre-Gothic norm, like, they would also collect, like, you know, old, antique, like, pre-Gothic glassware and plates, and, like, only drink out of their, like, crystal goblets with, like, carvings of, you know, Roman archers on them and stuff. And, again, it was not less materialistic or aesthetically oriented than Gothic art. It was just about transferring those impulses onto, like, again, a safe subject. Rome.
We love Rome, folks, don't we?
Yeah, there's no budget when you're, you know, there's no amount of money is too much to pay for, like, a, you know, an antique sculpture. As long as it's a sculpture of, like, Caesar and not, like, a monkey with a face on its ass. Of course, this was all about positioning themselves, the Italians, quite conveniently as the inheritors of Rome. Like, oh, we live in Italy, you know, Caesar lived in Italy, we're like the same guys.
It is exactly that one scene from The Sopranos where the Jewish guys are like, we've been around for thousands of years. What happened to the Roman Empire? And, and a bunch of fucking, like, greasy Sicilian men are like, you're fucking looking at him.
Tony is like, you're fucking looking at him. Yeah, I know. And so, of course, in order to make sense of, like, what had sort of happened to lead them away from their classical heritage in these dark years before the Renaissance, they had to understand this art movement of points and angles and heights and collapses as being antithetical to Rome. And therefore it was very easy to be like, oh, this is Gothic. And so that is where the term Gothic comes from. It comes from Renaissance scholars saying, we don't like this. It was Gothic. The Goths were the ones that sacked Rome. And in the same way, the Goths were the ones that made our nice Romanesque Carolingian handwriting all spiky and weird.
Never mind the fact that the Goths have evaporated by the time that happened.
Exactly. But, it's classic. what can I say? It's classic Roman behavior. We don't care who they are. They're north of the Alps. They're all barbarians up there. Except instead of barbarians, it was Goths. But it was like, they were all too happy to kind of just roll everyone into one big ball and be like, Goths!
They all
Goths!
They all dress in skins and live in mud.
And they tried to take our domes away. They tried to make our arches pointy. So, yeah. And that was a true return, returning to the classical tradition of being like, I don't care, they're all savages. So we have a letter from Raphael that he wrote to the Pope in 1518, where he talks about the state of architecture in Rome, which he says is bad. We need to return. There's too many pointy arches. And he says, next, in almost every country, he's talking about what happened right after the sack of Rome, and he says, next, in almost every country, the German style of architecture appeared, a style which one can see by its ornament is far removed from the good manner of the Romans and the antique. In the Roman period, apart from the structure of the building itself, there may be seen the most beautiful cornices, friezes, architraves, blah, 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 blah. German architecture, which in many places still persists, often used cramped and poorly constructed small figures for ornament. And worse still, strange animals, figures, and leaves, out of all reason, as corbels to support a beam. Nevertheless, this architecture had a certain justification. Originally, he means. It originated by the taking of branches of unpruned trees, binding them together, and bending them to construct pointed arches. Although this invention is not to be wholly despised, it is weak. So what he's saying here is that the Gothic pointed arch comes from ancient Germanic people tying trees together to make their houses.
Unpruned trees.
Yes, unpruned trees.
So taking entire trees
yes.
and tying them together.
Exactly. And he's saying, well, that was fine for the Goths, because that was all they had.
But we are Italians.
And then he says, no, but, geometrically, mathematically, a pointed arch is weaker. And why are we building all of these things that are, geometrically, architecturally, structurally unsound, just for the point of how they look, and the way that they look isn't even good?
Another point to make, no pun intended, is that think about how far we've come from the Carolingian project, which is about binding together. I mean, first of all, in a very basic sense, the Holy Roman Empire is meant to be the binding together of the Roman-based church with the Germanic peoples of Central and Northern Europe. And then the Carolingian Renaissance is very clearly meant to be about the unification of Christendom and bringing people together. And now what we've got is actually all that Gothic stuff. It's hideous. Not only is it hideous, it's foreign.
Yes.
So we're now drawing it's now the Carolingian style and the Romanesque style is being used to draw a divide between and make a take the current stylistic divide between the kinds of arches that generally Italians have tended to build and the kinds of arches that are in vogue in Germany, and saying this is a civilizational difference between us, which is that they don't know how trees work.
Yes, and it's also, again, yeah, you're completely right, because it's giving this, logical justification to the way that the Italians are, because they're saying, geometrically, mathematically, the rounded arch is stronger, and it is more beautiful. Mm-hmm. And these things are one and the same. There is a logical harmony to the way that the world should look and the way that it should work. Mm. And the style that has gone before is savage because it is a violation of these principles. How could something that is weaker be more beautiful? How could something that is less mathematically pure be more beautiful?
And they like this because they're stupid, is the implication.
Exactly.
But again, it's about the freezing out of Germanic peoples from the Roman identity and the Roman inheritance.
Exactly. And basically making an excuse for why they weren't, the Italians didn't always do rounded arches. They were like, actually, fuck, it was the Germans. They told us to do that.
They made us do this.
They made us. And again, the Goths sacked Rome, so it must all be Gothic. It must all be Gothic degeneracy. And this was all encouraged quite heartily by a little book called Germania, by a little guy called Tacitus, who was a 1st century Roman writer, who probably didn't think about the impact his words would have on nationalism 1,500 to 2,000 years down the line. But oh boy, it did. Because he wrote a whole bunch about, like, Germans are crazy, they live in the forest, they drink beer, they'll do fucking anything.
Well...
Well, we'll get there.
Not untrue.
We'll get there. German humanists circa 1520. He's not wrong.
He also wrote about Scottish people. Tacitus provides the first ever lines spoken in recorded history by a Scottish person that are almost certainly not true.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, yeah, actually Scottish people are like they are anarchists.
Yeah.
And they love peace.
No, exactly. Never mind that, like, Tacitus didn't go to these places.
No.
Whatever. He wrote that, the Germanic tribes of the first century were savage, and so that lent credibility to the contemporary Italian beliefs that Germans of the day were savage, or at least what they thought was German was savage, which was to say Gothic art, Gothic writing. And so, of course, then that opposition to these, quote, Gothic styles made it quite clear that, like, well, we're the new Romans. We're gonna make things good again.
We're living in a new Roman time.
Yeah, just as, Charlemagne and all of these old, Litura Antiqua were the right vessel for this Renaissance and all of these classical texts. And, of course, when the Renaissance humanists were reading all these classical texts they were rediscovering, they were reading them in Carolingian minuscule, because that's when they were written down, and they hadn't been copied much since then. That was when Tacitus's Germania was preserved, was during that Carolingian Renaissance. So they were like, okay, just as the writing that we're reading was the right vessel for people 500 years ago, we're going to make, like, a couple updates. We're going to spruce it up a little bit, but otherwise we're going to make it look pretty similar, and it's going to be the right vessel for our own Renaissance. Bada bing, bada boom. Let's have some gabagool.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Oh.
Now, a funny thing happened where the Italians were having so much fun becoming Roman again and denouncing the contemporary Germans as the evil Goths who had ruined all of their architecture that it actually made the Germans somewhat insecure. And there are stories of German humanist scholars during the early days of the Renaissance traveling to Italy to learn from the masters and become part of this burgeoning scholarly tradition, and they basically just get teased and bullied by the Italians for just being like, people of an inferior culture, if a culture at all. Because Germania by Tacitus was basically the only really substantial written source about Germanic people from the classical era, and that was written by a Roman. And so there was this question of, well, who even are the modern day Germans? They were, the Saxons were some of the last people to become Christian. The Germans were less literate during, the Carolingian era than necessarily the Irish or the Brits, or the French. And so there was a sense that these people were of a marginal or a somewhat sort of ill-defined culture, one that hadn't contributed anything to this scholarly tradition, one that was essentially inferior.
I haven't heard anything so far that I disagree with.
And that was what the Germans said. Well, and this led to a sort of gap that the Germans needed to fill, where they were asking themselves, and the Italians were asking them, no less, who are you people? What the hell are you doing here? You don't belong here. You're a freak.
You're a freak. You're a weirdo.
You're a weirdo. Yeah, exactly. And so the German humanists had to find something on which to base their identities in order to define their place in the past, so as to define their place in the present. And
Schnitzel. Big breads.
Yeah, schnitzel was actually invented in Portugal.
Wait,
Schnitzel
for real?
no, I have no idea. Who fucking knows? Everyone is eating shit like that. I mean, everyone has chicken nuggets. Like, okay,
Hell yeah.
Okay, you have breaded meat. Like, you're not special. Anyways, we
have a kind of ham that we put in jelly.
Okay, mate, we have a kind of eel we put in jelly. But crucially, this work, Germania, was a little bit, we've talked about it on the podcast before, it was a little bit in and of itself, or quite a bit, of a return piece, because it was Tacitus, who didn't know anything about, the real Germans of his day, but basically saying, well, there are these people, and, they're really primitive, they're really rustic, unlike us Romans who live in big cities and basically have everything we want, but, they're actually kind of better off, because they don't have everything that they want. It's very noble savage, right?
And it's exactly what he says about the Caledonians as well, where he uses Calgatus, who's almost certainly a fictional Celtic, war leader, to give this grand speech. The great speech about you make a desert and you call it peace. That's from that. That is entirely just a Roman using the...
He's playing with puppets. He's
well,
playing with dolls.
He's ventriloquizing these non-Roman cultures to try and launder his own opinions about the Roman society of his day.
Yes, and it's very similar with the Germanic tribes, because Tacitus says, well, Germany, Central Europe is an absolutely desolate place. No one goes there. So they're, it's full of deep forests and swamps.
Okay,
it's
that's
quite
true.
Inhospitable. And so you have these people that are cut off from the world. And so there's very little intermarriage. And he says this, they're a sort of pure race of people, pure Germanic, and they're
brackets
tall,
inbred.
Tall, they're sort of, light-haired.
Oh no, this isn't where that's from, is it?
They're,
oh god.
all very, they don't read or write, but they make decisions and laws by consensus. They're governed by, merit. Their women are quite strong, and the women will go to the field of battle with the men and egg them on, so the men know what they're fighting for, and the men fight for the glory of their families. They don't fight for rewards or titles, they fight for their people and their families.
That's right, folks. This is where this episode was going.
Yeah.
We've arrived.
That's right.
We're at the foothill of Nazism. Mm-hmm. And we're looking up at it, we're just like, oh, fuck.
And yeah, it's all very specific to Rome, because he says they have slaves, but they're not mean to the slaves.
Yeah.
The slaves are chill, and they're all chill. They don't order the slaves around and make the slaves, hand feed them and stuff. And their kids, their kids have tough lives. It's tough out there in the desolate swamps. But actually, the fact that the kids aren't spoiled makes the kids much tougher. Unlike, in the implication, what's not said but is implied is, unlike us Romans who spoil our kids.
Yeah.
Unlike us Romans whose women stay at home and don't help us out.
And unlike us Romans who are being governed by autocrats.
Yes, exactly. I won't get into all of it, but you get the gist. And so actually this made for pretty good material for the Germans to look at and be like, actually...
I'm not going to do any kind of intertextuality because critical analysis hasn't been invented yet.
The levels of intertextuality were on the floor in the things that we're about to discuss. And so one of the people who Tacitus mentions is a guy who presumably did exist. We don't know that much about who he really was, but it was Arminius, who was a chieftain of the Cherusci, which is one of the tribes of the Germanic people, and he had led an alliance of Germanic tribes against the Romans in the year 9 AD at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and he was mentioned by Tacitus as like a sort of savior and liberator and unifier of the German peoples. Now, to the German humanists who had sort of grown up in the shadows of people like Caesar and Alexander, Arminius made for the perfect guy to be the German answer to those figures. In fact, quite literally the answer to those figures, because in 1520, a German humanist wrote an addendum to a dialogue by Lucian, the Roman author, who was, it was a debate originally between Alexander, Hannibal, and Scipio mediated by King Minos about who was the best general of the three of them. And in von Hutten's version, after the debate ends, it's gate-crashed by Arminius, who shows up and says, hey, wait, what about me? So the Germans are inserting their national hero now, who they've sort of propped up, into the narrative. And I really like this quote.
I can see why. First, you must pardon me if my frank manner of speaking was offensive to you. It is a peculiarity of Germans to avoid flattery when speaking freely and seriously. My complaint is quite frankly this, that when you, with honor and was your prerogative, set out to settle the dispute of whom amongst the generals was the most deserving of the highest honor, you overlooked me as though I never existed. I'm sorry we're so rude.
I know, isn't that really... I'm sorry I have this German directness.
You know, it is simply just part of our German culture that we don't treat anybody else with basic respect.
Yeah. And it may surprise you to hear this, but at the end of von Hutten's version of the debate, Arminius wins.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The judge, the adjudicator, says, actually, Arminius is way cooler than Alexander or
Playing
Hannibal
with
or
dolls.
Scipio.
That's what this is.
It is bonkers. But this debate really leans into this noble savage idea because, I mean, Arminius, he actually was an ally of the Romans for quite some time in his life and even served in the Roman army before he fought against them. But this is used as sort of fodder for why he is such a great leader, because his Germanic spirit persisted even when he was forced to serve the Romans. And, you know, he wasn't born into the lap of luxury like Alexander or Hannibal or Scipio. You know, he was a hard graft.
He was born in a bog full of piss.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And he died in a bog full of piss.
And isn't that the arc of all German history?
Yeah. And so this was the perfect sort of foil to the Italians that the Germans could embrace. Oh, you guys, you know, invented civilization. You guys invented all of these disciplines. Well, look at how good it did you in the end. Even the Romans themselves during the Roman Empire were writing about how bad their country was and how great the Germans were, you know.
Pay no attention to the fact that we don't have any writings from the Germans because they couldn't fucking read.
Exactly, but it made Germanness into something that, you know, had hitherto been intangible and yet preserved by the German people. The Germans didn't need to write because, as we heard from Tacitus himself, the German essence was contained in the spirit of the people, and it was the German people collectively were a vessel for it. And
again, I know we've already signposted where this is going, but whenever you start hearing about the phrase German essence, it should activate your fight or flight response.
Yeah, and of course at this time in history there was no conception of a German state as in a group of people who are all German and are all governed by the same person, but there was this conception already of a German people, of a people who are united by their German birthright and their inheritance of, you know, they loved drinking beer and reciting oral traditions in the woods and stabbing each other.
Oh yeah, because nobody else in Northern Europe was doing that. Drinking large flagons of beer and reciting poetry.
But yeah, it made, you know, their people
Yeah, but super special.
It made their people out to be, super special because they hadn't needed all of these trappings of excess and decadence that the Romans had been so desperate for. All they needed was, you know, a bottle of beer and a knife. Bish bash bosh. Let's go paint the forest red.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And, you know, the fact that there was very little record of the Germans and, you know, after the fall of Rome and during Rome. And that was actually spun, and the Goths was spun as a sign of how ubiquitous Germanness was. Like, did the Goths get absorbed by other tribes, or did other tribes get absorbed by the Goths? You know, was
the Goths got
absorbed. did this Germanic identity go undocumented, or was it just such a fundamental part of the culture in Europe that it is actually... Aaron is making a jerking off motion with his hand, which I completely agree with. And I think this level of rhetoric reached a kind of point of ridiculousness, I think, even by, like, humanist nationalist standards. But it was like, that's what you had to do in order to construct a cohesive, coherent, valid German identity in the 1500s. You had to go to these extreme ends because there wasn't much to go on. So yeah, there was this idea, well, you know, we don't know anything about the Germans, nothing was written about them, but was that because, you know, they were never important, or is it because Germanness was so fundamental and so far-reaching that, like, there's an element of Germanness everywhere that you look?
I would be less mean about this if two things weren't true. If, number one, Germans didn't just, like, have, like, a death wish for me in particular and didn't constantly try and, like, humiliate me in public. And number two...
That was literally what the Italian humanists were saying, though.
Yeah.
They were like, I go out and a German humiliates me.
And number two, if this language and this exact, like, ideology wasn't used as a justification to essentially try and end the world...
Yeah.
Less than 100 years ago.
And of course, this parallel, you know, this conflict that the Italians had sort of imagined between, you know, the parallels between the Goths and the Romans and the Italians themselves in the, quote, Gothic art. This, you know, then the Germans of their day were actually able to embrace this idea that Germanness and Italianness are diametrically opposed. Because there were ongoing conflicts, for instance, between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Italians. They actually didn't let him go to Rome to get crowned. It was a big deal. And there was a little thing called the Reformation going on in Northern Europe, which meant that a lot of Germans were starting to think about how they were different to the Italians culturally. And so Germans said, yeah, you know what, actually, after this period, there was a period of trying to synthesize German identity into classical identity, which is where we get things like this Arminius dialogue from. But a little bit after that, Germans said, you know what, actually, no. We are incompatible, only the one thing that you've got wrong is that we are better than you.
I would say, let's go to the scoreboard. That's my answer to that.
So what does this have to do with fonts?
Good question, Olivia. What does this have to do with fonts?
The first fonts, the first typefaces. People will say, don't call them fonts, they're typefaces. That is technically true, so I will do my best to say typefaces. When movable, there was a little snag, movable type printing when it was invented. It was invented in 14... snap.
You can...
I don't know why 1453 came to mind. I know that's Constantinople, but it was the 1450s, wasn't it?
When is Gutenberg Press? I do think it's very charming that you put together this entire episode about fonts and typefaces and didn't think to check when the printing press was invented.
Well, it was actually invented over several centuries due to contributions by the Chinese and the Germans.
Around about 1440.
1440. I was close. So, when a man named Johannes Gutenberg is putting his finishing touches on his new movable type printing press around the year 1440 and starting to crank out Bibles at a rate faster than a scribe ever could, he is not much thinking yet about questions of what should these letters look like. He's thinking, okay, well, what do letters look like that I see? And he makes them in this sort of quite handwritten, quote, Gothic style. What's also called black letter. So he's just modeling them essentially on handwriting. However, by this point, there has already been quite a bit of pushback against this style of writing. So by the 1470s, we already have French people and Italians saying, no, 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 no.
I'm not reading this shit.
I am not gonna read something that you print in these awful letters.
I don't care how cool this rhinoceros is.
Exactly. And quite quickly, you see a dichotomy appear where you see in Europe that black letter, Gothic, I will use a lot of synonyms for these fonts, medieval, textura quadrata, angular fonts, calligraphic fonts are being used for specific things. They're being used for Germanic languages. They're being used for vernacular. They're being used for Protestant texts.
Because they are suitably Protestant in the sense that they're just sort of like intense, hard to get your head around, and sort of vaguely off-putting. Which is the vibe of early Lutheranism.
And because they're based on handwriting, much more so, they're actually seen as more democratic in a way. So this is an argument that will follow these letters through till the 20th century, is that they are actually easier to read than...
They're fucking not,
what
though!
we think of as Times New Roman. So what's called Antiqua, Littera Antiqua, what's called Littera Antiqua by the humanists, and is, akin to sort of Times New Roman and all these Roman fonts, as we call them.
They're just not, though.
Well,
that is
anyways,
such cope.
And so there is an interesting period of coexistence in Europe where we see the Antiqua fonts being used for humanism and being used for Catholic purposes, being used for sort of scholarly purposes, but it's somewhat short-lived. And I think legibility, I would guess, plays a bit of a role. I think also being able to print quite small is important in
Once
an era
again,
where
scoreboard.
books are still expensive, even though you can print them. And I think that Antiqua fonts are, these humanist fonts are just easier to read at smaller sizes, especially. But you do have a kind of, a period of coexistence. So, for instance, when Christopher Columbus returns from the New Worlds, he writes about his pamphlet about his travels, and you can actually see in the pamphlet that the titles are written in all caps in an Antiqua font, but the body is written entirely in black letter font. And so...
That is unfortunately bad design.
It's a little goofy, yeah. And...
Not the worst thing Christopher Columbus did, just to be clear.
No. So, in the heartland of the Gothic art movement in France, these letters are kind of abandoned. These black letter scripts are sort of abandoned over the next century or so. In England, they hold on a bit longer, so for quite a while, the Houses of Parliament would print their new bills and laws for the public in black letter fonts because it was actually seen as more populist and more democratic, whereas the Antiqua old-style fonts were seen as being a bit sort of haughty and a bit elevated. And actually, it took the humanists a while to warm up to the printing press. I don't know if you know this. The Renaissance Italians kind of didn't like the printing press.
For some reason, that kind of makes sense to me. I don't know the reasons, but, it feels conceptually very non-human.
Yeah, well, exactly, because they liked the scribe, and the scribe was an active player in the transmission of the text, that the scribe could, needed to be literate and educated in order to properly transmit this text, because the scribe could correct the text. I mean, that was what Elquine did with the Vulgate Bible. He went through and he corrected the grammar. Oh, mate. This conjugation's all wrong. No, never mind. I'm not going to do more Yorkshire guy correcting Latin grammar.
Was that meant to be Yorkshire?
Yeah. Can you do a Yorkshire guy correcting Latin grammar?
By gum, this grammar's fucked.
Exactly. And... I mean, all the early printers were Germans, so the Italian humanists were like, I don't want Germans touching my letters. That's disgusting. So yeah, they really didn't like it. And, it was like, well, if there's an error in the text, they'll just print 1,000 pages. Then they'll realize they made an error and they'll still just distribute them. because it's just like, it's very utilitarian. So yeah, they didn't like it. But I mean, it's the printing press, mate. Like, you're not going to be able to resist it for that long.
In the immortal words of a football commentator, Pandora's not going back in the box.
Nope. Definitely not. And
I love that quote. So.
no, definitely. And so throughout this quote-unquote Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the Germans are in the background kind of simmering away, stirring their big pot of German identity, trying to sort of cook it up into a sort of sensible stew.
But they're still living in a country called the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah. Which, they're trying to put a good spin on. They're like, well, Romans, German?
Yeah, it's the Holy Roman Empire.
Romans, German? ...
of the German nation.
The Holy Roman Empire.de.
Don't look over there, it's all these Czech people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I would say for, like, the 1600s, 1700s, like, Germanness is still quite theoretical in it. And by, like, by 1800, no one is using black letter. No one is using Gothic writing anymore, except the Germans. In fact, they have been, like, tinkering away at Gothic fonts. Like, we need to create the idea Gothic font, one that is beautifully Gothic, but also maybe a little bit easier to read.
Yeah, beautifully Gothic.
So the main style is called Fraktur, because it's sort of bent. Is broken.
I think it's beautiful, and it speaks to the eternal German soul. They're like, well, we have this incredibly obtuse systems that nobody else in the world uses. What if we just kept refining it and making it more alienating?
Yeah.
This is what is being about. This is what being German is all about.
Exactly. But there's always still this element of, like, well, now, like, fewer and fewer people can really read these German fonts. And that's not great because, like, some Germans want to be part of the international scholarly community still. Some Germans want their shit to be able to get read by other people. And it's just a little bit inconvenient to have this reliance on these letters that other people find difficult to read. And so there is this big push in the 1800s. So in the 1800s, Germans and, like, a few other people, sort of the Swedes, some of the Nordics, and, like, occasionally the Dutch for the Bible specifically, are printing in these fonts, but absolutely no one else in Europe.
The German-adjacent peoples.
The German-adjacent people and the, broader Germanosphere. People, like, printing the Bible in Germanic languages might use these fonts to signal how based and Protestant and populist they are. But, yeah, apart from that, it's not great. And it turns into this big debate in Germany in the 1800s, while the German state, in the face of all of these pressures, like Napoleon, for instance, the German state is starting to coalesce into something that might actually be something like a group of people who might share, to some extent, a common language.
Well, Napoleon throws them a massive bone by abolishing the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And it's like, right, you have to start from scratch now.
Well, exactly. And some Germans are of the camp of, like, well, we need to embrace, our identity as, like, people who live in the world. And we should probably stop hanging on to this outdated sort of method of, writing and this sort of, style of printing that alienates people. And other Germans are saying, no,
No more!
We've only barely started to exist as a people. If you go to a German school, you will see people using, like, English and French and Latin words, and they...
Definitely not a thing that Germans bitch about now.
Definitely not. And, these people clearly have, like, contempt for the German language. They clearly see it as a low-prestige, low-status language. And they're trying to make it less German by changing the way that it looks. And Otto von Bismarck, the first chancellor of a unified Germany, famously would refuse to read German books that were printed in Antiqua fonts. He would, like, give them back to the person that gave them to him. And he would say, no, good German books, good German letters. And over the course of the 19th century, there was this big German nationalist movement that was heavily sort of based in the overarching, like, romantic movement. That was kind of a response to, like, getting a little bit sick of humanism, a little bit anxious about industrialization. People wanted to go back to the primitive and the savage and the mythology and the woods and the swamps. Tristan and Isolde, you know, the Song of Roland, the Nibelungenlied, all of these things became extremely chic in the 1800s when people were sick of the sort of cultured, cultivated worlds.
And this is a process that's happening across Europe.
Yeah, we get it. In England in the Victorian era, it's a very socialist thing in the hands of William Morris, who has Kelmscott Press, which prints sort of fairy tales and books in medieval fonts. And so the image of the kind of medieval rustic savagery, it can take many forms, but in the hands of German nationalists, it becomes this sort of way of clearing out space for themselves and for defining their national identity.
Again, as soon as you start talking about Germans clearing living space, I start to, like, we're not there yet.
And the problem, one of the problems was that in the 19th century, the Germans were absolutely cooking.
Yeah.
You know, you get amazing literature.
Well, this is the other thing is that, like, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to, like, emphasize this is a process that's happening in various guises in basically every single European country simultaneously, because we have signposted that we're heading towards the Nazis, but everything that's happened up to this point, aside from the sort of the weirdness of making it about fonts, is completely standard. And there is a tendency in German historiography, both in terms of German historians and people writing about Germany, to assume this idea of the Sondweg, the sort of the special path.
Yeah.
That German history is somehow unique, and that everything in German history is leading to 1939. And that Germany is either uniquely kind of mythologized or uniquely cursed.
Yeah.
Again, they're weird about... So far, the only thing that's unique about Germany is they're being weird about fonts. And they have a slightly more of a complex about not being Romans. I don't want to give you the impression that this is... Because we're talking about things like, you know, breathing space and, like, and German nationalism that have a certain register now, and I have played into that for comedy purposes, but, like, didn't have to go that way.
No, definitely not. And there is a general interest across all European and Western cultures in the 19th century to, for lack of a better word, scientificize their like identities and their existences.
Again, every country is digging up old Roman texts that vaguely refer to the region that they now live in and saying, wow, they really thought we were cool.
Wow, I can't believe they invented the type of race science I'm doing right now. That's great.
But this is why I wanted to... I've been drawing out the comparison with Tacitus's writings about Caledonia, because, again, it's like... Calgatus and the Caledonians do get appropriated in Scotland for pretty much exactly the same reasons as the Germans are appropriating Armenia or whatever his name is.
Arminius.
Armenian.
Armenian man.
Armenian man. To be fair, he probably did have a big mustache because he was German. But like that exact same process is happening with pretty much the exact same texts. And those texts were produced for the same reason.
Yeah. And
you're not special, Germany.
No, exactly. And not everyone that was doing this was, like, uniquely evil. So, I mean, not to, like, jump the gun too much, but I remember, like, looking at various, like, German romantic depictions of pagans, and it's obviously like, oh, here's, like, a sexy, big-boobed blonde woman, like, worshipping the sun. And if you look at these artists, like, 50% of them were, like, huge Nazis, and 50% of them died in the concentration camps. Like, it was not innately fascistic at the time. But there was this effort to synthesize German language, especially as a vessel of German culture and history, into this national project. I mean, you have the Brothers Grimm, which they're both known for the fairy tales they collected, I think it's less well known that one of them was a pioneering German linguist and made some contributions to linguistics and to the linguistics of the Germanic languages that are still extremely respected today. But you have to evaluate them in the context of these were two guys who set out from their home trying to figure out, like, what is Germanness? And they were looking for Germanness in the woods, in the villages, in the forests, when they talked to people. And when they thought about the fables they were hearing from people, when they decided what to write down and how to write it down and how to describe the languages and how to describe the people and the themes and the stories, the question was on their mind of who are we and who do we want to be and who do we want to have been. So it was not an ideologically neutral process. It was, I think, existential. And It doesn't mean it was evil, but it was existential.
No, nationalism is in a lot of ways. It's a very thin ideology that can kind of be grafted onto anything you want.
Yeah, definitely.
You can... There's nothing inherently fascistic about this kind of invented past. But you do have to recognize that nationalism is an ideology, it is a political project. It's not neutral.
Yeah.
And they're not discovering, the Brothers Grimm and all the other people who are part of what they see as a reinvention of Germanness. They are not reinventing Germany, they are inventing Germany.
Yes, exactly. And there's this dichotomy when you look at texts from the 19th century. Goethe is printed in black letter. The Brothers Grimm are printed in black letter. When Humboldt catalogs all the kinds of penguin, that's printed in Antiqua. And it's a dichotomy. And there comes to be this belief amongst certain German nationalists that the impenetrability of black letter writing is actually necessary in order to guard German linguistic purity, which of course is linked to German racial purity, and to keep foreign influences out of German. I mean, I haven't mentioned this yet. I should mention this before. In Germany, up until they stopped using black letter altogether in printing, foreign loanwords were always printed in Antiqua. So you'd have a page of black letter. Let me actually show you a picture of this. You have a page of black letter.
That's fucked.
And then if there was a foreign word, like, I don't know, lieutenant, it would just be printed in a completely different font entirely. So as a German printer, you would have to have, unlike other printers, you'd have to have two sets of letter forms.
Jesus.
And this is one of the other reasons, by the way, why black letter is super inconvenient, is because you have to have physical print there, physical type. Mm-hmm. And it becomes quite specialist, sort of making black letter type, because it's not as type setting and type casting becomes typecasting. That's funny. Becomes more and more globalized, industrialized. It becomes more and more specialized to have these quote German characters, to the point where in the early 1900s, German nationalists are saying it's like a global conspiracy against Germans that you can't get black letter typewriters.
Wow.
That is a Gothic typewriter. Sorry.
Quick sidebar, non-German, just to get the German out of my system a little bit. I want to there's not going to be a better time for us to talk about this. It's one of my favorite facts that a lot of European countries are very heavily regulate the print industry and what can be printed and blah, 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 blah. The Ottomans never really do this to the same degree. Like they sort of half-heartedly ban it at one point. And the reason for that is the Ottomans don't need to worry about the disruptive influences of print on Ottoman society, because Ottoman Turkish is still at this point written in Arabic, and they haven't figured out how to do Arabic printing yet. Okay, Olivia's now showing me the... I hate this. It's just Olivia showed me a page of a German pamphlet, and it's like, Das Schlieven, Flieven, Flievenwagen Consensus. Der Unterwagenstagen
is printed in like a normal serif font, whereas everything else is printed in this Gothic font. Same with officiers.
Imagine if you were just reading a normal report, and then it just had one word that was in Comic Sans.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's bonkers. And this was actually part of, like, the point of the project, was to lay bare on the page the differences between German and everyone else, and the particularity, the peculiarity of the German language, the German people, the German culture. And this was something that was articulated by German nationalists when they were arguing for why we should not abandon these fonts, because one of the main proponents of keeping the black letter fonts actually drew a parallel between the German huts, the German pointed arches, the German forests, and the black letter writing. And he said, actually, the fact that this is, again, impenetrable and difficult to read is really good, and it's part of our culture. This is, it's stoic, it's austere, it's serious, like...
Just like VR.
Like the German forests, like the German people. I mean, the romanticization of wilderness and of sort of ruggedness and savageness was at an absolute height here.
Meanwhile, contemporary Germany is like the most fucking, like, urbanized society in Europe.
What do you mean you don't sell my favorite brand of yogurt at Salida?
For any Americans who've never been to Germany, it looks like Iowa.
There is a pothole on my cycle lane. I know it is only 6 centimeters wide right now, but this violates the Pottenhollen Paving Gazette, which specifies that my German arse cannot be harmed over the course of the cycle ride. I will write a strongly worded letter to my local government.
The Minister President must hear of this.
Oh, but first I must go home and eat my brat herring.
Exercising trauma.
Fill in
That's
the
what
hole
this show is.
with Kartoffelsalat. Anyways, but it reaches a point, and also, like, again, we talk about global scholarly communities, like, it becomes quite, like, a salient talking point for these German nationalists that, like, the schools and the universities who are like, oh, I don't want to send my pupils, my students out into the world not, like, knowing how to read normal letters. And the German nationalists are like, oh, obviously they're trying to indoctrinate the kids against Germanness.
They've turned the Waynes against us.
Yeah, and so you get these, essays where it's like, and if you go to a university, you won't see a single good German letter anywhere.
You're going to become woke.
Only those namby-pamby round Roman letters. So yeah, it's bonkers, and it actually goes to the Reichstag, the proposal to make Antiqua the national German font, and it's debated for, like, days, and there are people who are, like, crying while they're arguing about it on both sides. People are very passionate about this in, I think it's 1911.
I think Germans were allowed to cry.
They are when it comes to fonts. The typeface, the utility of the typeface is so important to me. I just worry that the efficiency of the reading experience might be hampered.
I also just find it it's very fun to me to think of all these German intellectuals being like, all of these children are going to university and they're not being exposed to proper German culture. Because when I went to university, it's full of goths.
Yeah. It's true. No, it's true.
And I will say, where you see the most goths? Anywhere in the world. Berlin.
Oh, Berlin, yeah, definitely.
So I guess they were right, maybe.
I mean, I'm of the personal opinion that eventually, I think Fraktur and all of these black letter Gothic styles, I think they would have faded away. Because it was just, I think they would have faded away anyways, regardless of the Nazis.
But they didn't fade away, did they?
Not necessarily, no. I think, I think, like, the motion to make Antiqua the national sort of government font was defeated. I mean, Fraktur was not the official font at the time. It's not like an official German government font at the time. So this was an attempt to sort of stamp out Fraktur. It was narrowly defeated. I think Fraktur still would have been extinguished just because of all the reasons we mentioned.
That it's bad?
Yes. Unless, and of course, like in Germany, the Roaring Twenties were the perfect opportunity for people to leave all that baggage behind.
Yeah, but now we know, and now we're going to cover a lot of beats that everybody who did A-level history knows. We start from 1911. Germany gets too comfortable in bed with Austria-Hungary, ends up getting dragged into a massive pointless war, which Germany then loses, hyperinflation, the Kit Kat Club.
Liza
Minnelli's there. And then in 1933, they decide that this clearly mentally ill former junior officer of the Imperial German Army, we can keep him in his box.
Yep.
It's fine if we give him the chancellorship.
No, yeah, exactly.
That is one of the, like most black comedy moments of all time, is the fact that Hitler gets the chancellorship not because he wins a majority, but because all the conservative leaders are just like, well, this guy is such a fucking stone-cold lunatic that surely he's not he's too mad to actually be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, remember when we went to the German Historical Museum and they had that exhibit about alternate histories, and one of the alternate histories, like, what if Hindenburg had, like, one useful aide?
Hey man, why don't you just pick, like, a sort of vaguely reactionary Christian Democrat? That's what you are.
Yeah. No, exactly. So the Nazis come to power, and the Nazis, I mean, of course, they love Gothic fonts, because the Nazis, what do we know about? They love weird esoterica. They love all of the weird, romantic, esoteric, paganistic, anti-Christian stuff that's been associated with the Romantic movement thus far. They love all that, like, sun-worshipping, fucking woo-woo granola, you know, we were kings.
Yeah.
We're all Norwegian.
They hate all that, like, Kumbaya, Charlemagne,
Catholic.
Christendom shit.
Yeah, they hate the Catholics. I mean, the Catholics almost sort of quite unitedly as a bloc vote against the Nazis. And you see all of these early Nazi posters where there are, you know, these invectives to defend the fatherland and whatnot, and they're all written in black letter. And so it's no surprise, again, I think that the Nazis would embrace these fonts as a clear marker of distinct Germanness and German exceptionalism.
Because, again, they love all that shit that we've been talking about. Like, actually, the fact that we're unable to fully engage with the rest of Europe is a good thing. No,
exactly. But there's one snag, right? Do you know what this is? I think I've told you.
I genuinely don't know. Let me open the...
No, I have told you, actually. Because
I don't know.
One person... Oh, yeah. Wait. Oh, fuck yeah. Sorry, I just opened my phone and saw a really cool painting of Arminius beating some Romans, and I became really nationalist for a second. One key person does not like black letter Gothic fonts.
Who's that?
A little man named Adolf Hitler.
Oh my god.
So yeah, I mean, like, for instance, here you see this, like, this is a 1924 poster of an eagle flying towards a sun with a swastika.
It's a pretty standard,
standard. It says in, like, Gothic fonts, Germany's freedom, Deutschland's Befreiung, or Germany's liberation. And, oh yeah, by the way, I should have mentioned this before. You know what these Nazis are reading? They're reading Tacitus's Germania.
Yeah.
By the way, Heinrich Himmler reads it in the 1920s, becomes obsessed with it, vows to resurrect Germany in its image, petitions Mussolini to give Germany, or he tells Hitler to tell Mussolini to give Germany the only copy of it in existence, which I think Hitler is like, whatever, man, I don't care. I'm not all cultured like that. And Mussolini is like, yeah, sure, whatever. And all the Italians are like, no, this is a work of key Roman literature. You can't just be giving it away like that.
To the barbarians.
So it actually becomes, like, really controversial in Italy that Mussolini is trying to give Hitler an obscure medieval manuscript from the, like, 10th century. Anyways, but Hitler hates Gothic fonts. That's the problem. They all love Germanicness. They all love the esoterica. Hitler does not like Germanic fonts. He does not like Gothic fonts. So he says in a 1934 speech...
Let's hear... Do it in Ratbald the Bald / Taika Waititi Hitler.
Your alleged Gothic internalization does not fit well in this age of steel and iron, glass and concrete, of womanly beauty and manly strength, of head raised high and intention defiant. In 100 years, our language will be the European language. The nations of the East, the North, and the West will, to communicate with us, learn our language. The prerequisite for this, the script called Gothic, is replaced by the script we have called Latin so far.
And that, I think, speaks to a fundamental difference in what makes Hitler stand out within the rest of the Nazi movement, which is that I'm going to make a controversial comparison. It's sort of the Stalin versus Trotsky socialism in one country argument about is Germany a fortress, or is Germany the foundation of world civilization?
Well, exactly. It's like, is it the past or is it the future? And because there is also this incredibly futuristic element to Nazism, in fact, I would say they're kind of competing strains of the, like, extreme return, woman in a plaid sundress, traditionalism, and then there is the futurism, the, like, techno-futurism, and
Man, the 30s were fucking weird.
Yeah,
you ever think about how weird they were?
What a crazy time to be alive.
You don't think about how weird they are because you mostly think about how bad they were.
What's crazy is, like, there's all these, like, historical fashion, like, people. And when people are like, and some people have like, oh, I love Edwardian, I love the 20s. When people are like, I love the 30s, it's like, oh, you love the era that's like fashion indistinct.
I hear the Kill Bill sirens when people say that.
But has insane vibes. I don't even disrespect it. I just think it's like, it embodies a psychology that is like unknown to me, unknowable to me even.
It's like we're all, the human race is just going to become one gigantic machine.
Yes.
That is what everybody converges on in the 1930s. It's fucking
mad.
terrifying.
It's mad. And so...
That's what Art Deco is.
And it's a very strange, like, tension that emerges between Hitler and, like, the Gothic fonts. I think, like, a kind of underrated rivalry of the 1930s and 40s.
Well, to be fair, there were other rivalries in the 30s and 40s that took precedence for most people.
But it's really strange. I mean, like... Because Germans clearly go absolutely ham for these fonts. I mean, people still go bananas for, like, Gothic fonts. People today still think they're cool and vibey and have, like, aura, as the kids say.
They're definitely vibey.
And Germans are interacting with them during the Nazi era in the exact same way. But Hitler does not like them. And, I mean, this is partially practical. Because, again, in order to print Gothic fonts, you have to have physical Gothic letters. And what are the Germans realizing as they conquer Poland and the Netherlands and France? Well, they want to circulate their propaganda and their ideologies, and they go to the type foundries and they go to the, typesetters and the printers and the printing houses, and they go,
Where are all the sharp letters?
These French people only have the round letters, not the French letters. So, I mean, really, in part, it was purely economical as well, because it was like, well... During a war, it seems like a frivolous expense to cast several million new letters when this could be spent more easily on other things, like horses or boots. And so, actually, in 1941, and the practical aspect is really important to understanding what I have to say next, because there's another weird aspect of tension that builds up over the sort of run-up to World War II, where there's this belief that because the Antiqua letters are, like, they're international and they're scholarly, they're, like, Jewish, right? So they get, like, a Jewish tone, and there's actually...
Because if there's one thing I know about Jewish languages, it's they're written...
in black letter, Latin fonts.
No, I was going to say in Antiqua...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in Antiqua Latin fonts. No, exactly. But
by the way, Hebrew writing and Jewish languages have been on an entirely unrelated journey.
No, exactly.
As have the Greeks, as have the Slavic Cyrillic alphabets.
Yeah, so there's actually like a bill or like something that's passed before the war actually saying that newspapers, it's not like a mandate, but it's sort of like saying that newspapers should not print in Antiqua. But then there's a complete about-face on this during the war, I think because of the practical element. of just these letters do not exist physically in great enough quantities, and everyone else thinks they're weird. And how can we get everyone speaking German if they can't read the letters that we have? Hitler actually backtracks on this decision, and I think he's always kind of hated these Gothic fonts, and he circulates a memo saying Gothic letters are Jewish. And you cannot use them.
My brain is, like, collapsing in on itself right now.
And it's utterly bizarre. But again, you have to understand it in the lens of this practical moment where they are trying furiously to disseminate their language. I mean, remember, this is one of the things that the Nazis want. Soon everyone will be speaking our language. They want to disseminate their culture and their language as effectively as possible.
And it's so classically like Hitler to not say, hey, just so everybody knows, like, we're going to have to, like, there's going to be a transitional period.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, no, this needs to be everything needs to be an ideological decision, so I'm going to come up with a flimsy ideological pretext, which is the Jews have inceptioned the Gothic alphabet into our brains in order to make us weird and off-putting to the rest of the world.
No,
as if we weren't already doing that ourselves.
And strangely, and this ties into the idea, I think, that Gothic letters are, like, more populistic and less intellectual. The main leniency that is given is that women's magazines are still printed in black letter for a little while after this. Yeah.
Well, you know, it is very important that we all get on the same page, because these letters that we've been using for hundreds of years, they were invented by the Jews to trick us. But the chicks can still use them. The Frauen, they're still allowed. They can be a little bit Jewish.
Yeah. But no, I mean, this really, I think, gets to the heart of, like,
Olivia, do you agree that the Frauen can be a little bit Jewish?
The Frauen can be a little bit Jewish. Frauen, hit me up if you want to be a little bit Jewish. But no, I think this goes to show you that what it really is a debate about, like, low culture trying to prevail over high culture, because the women's magazines are low culture. And so people are like, we don't need to edify them as sort of relentlessly. Oh dear. But yeah, it is actually really funny, because you get immediately after 1941 all of these, like, futuristic styles of fonts in the men's magazines and the sort of, you know, gender neutral messaging. But then, yeah, the ones that are like, women, you need to have as many, because it's the women's messaging is regressive.
Yeah.
Women, you need to have as many babies as possible. Of course they're gonna make it all like, oh, and you're gonna be like some freaking, like, Germanic, tribal, Iron Age fucking, like, nursemaid or whatever, like...
Put this mud on your face.
Yeah, exactly.
And get into bog.
Don't know how to read. Forget how to read. Just get in the bog. So, yeah. And there's this weird transitional period of, like, as well of, like, sort of extremely futuristic or, like, geometric Nazi fonts.
Show me the Nazi fonts.
They're called Schachstiefel, like, fonts, which means, like, boot shaft fonts.
Ugh.
Because they're, like, militaristic. So these are, I mean...
Subtlety was never their strong suit as a movement.
So yeah, I mean, the big one that everyone knows is called Tannenbaum, which is, you'll know it when you see it. This was, like, and for a while, this was, like, as close as I think there could be to the official Nazi font, because it was kind of like the perfect blend of, like, futuristic geometry, but also like, oh, it's a little bit Germanic visit. And I only realized while researching this that this is the font that's used in every stop on the train line I used to live on in Berlin.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I know. I was telling my mom this, and she was like, oh my god.
That's not how your mother speaks.
She was like, oh my god.
She's a Cali girl.
Yeah, so she is.
Actually, no, I like perpetuating the fiction that your parents are little Germans.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they are, but not in that way.
Yeah. Oh, right. It's called Tannenberg. Sorry, not Tannenbaum.
This fucking thing.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
No.
It's ugly.
No, it is ugly, yeah. And it was used, it's the font that was used in all of the signage for the S1 line in Berlin, which was installed during the Nazi era.
Ugh.
During that, like...
Which line?
The S1.
S1.
No,
Berlin.
wait, give me my phone back. I'll show you. I have a gallery of S1 signs on my phone.
Great. In case anybody ever doubts...
No, look.
Oh my god. I don't like this.
Yeah, and I never... But that's the thing is, as, like, S-Bahn signs, they look a little bit innocuous. But then when you look at them, it's like, oh yeah, that does have Nazistic vibes. So yeah, they just had to throw the, good, pure Germanic fonts under the bus in the name of modernity, essentially, is the long and short of it. I think, like... If it were not for the physical constraints of the printing press and needing these physical letters, I don't think they would have completely been outlawed. But at the same time, I think the black letter days were numbered in the first place. We've come a long ways from our beginnings in
Charlemagne.
8th century Frankish kingdoms.
We've tried to trace the entire history of German national identity via fonts.
Yeah, wasn't it fun?
I enjoyed it.
It's a little bit of fun.
What did we learn, Palmer?
Well, we learned not to do Nazism again.
Although God knows why we did it.
Well, we learned that, everything, I think. It's so hard to understand, like, European and German and Italian and all of these, but especially German national identity. It's impossible to understand without the context of Italy and without the context of Rome. And it's impossible to understand the development of national identity without understanding the insecurity and the sort of omnipresence of Rome and the overbearing shadow of Rome, and needing to sort of measure up and create one's place in the historical narrative. And language and the idea of language, which is something that is just such an obvious difference between different peoples and is such a clear and natural sort of boundary by which people can say, I'm this group and these people are that group. It's so easy for people to emphasize this difference and to create a sense of exceptionalism around it.
And I think if we could return to the Middle Ages momentarily... I think that what we see, if we compare where we started this journey from where we ended it, I think we can see that it's ultimately also the story of the fragmentation of any sort of sense of Christendom and the gradual recession of the idea that, like, Christendom is a universal community that everybody belongs to. And the slow sort of... And obviously Christendom is not separable from the idea of Rome.
Yeah.
Because Christians from the fucking 1st century onwards are like, and especially after the 4th century, when the Roman Empire becomes Christian, are directly equating the kingdom of God with the Empire of Rome. And the story of modernity is the story, in many ways, of the breaking apart of that universal community, first through the Reformation and then through the sort of the nationalist movements of the 18th and 19th centuries that have led to the global order that we live in today.
Yes, I agree, because the story of these nationalisms, as they relate to, modern countries and nation states, it is a story of having to leave Christendom behind. Because what does Christianity tell you? And what were the Catholics and the Protestants saying to the Nazis?
Don't do this.
Don't do this. We're all human beings.
Even the Jews.
All of our souls.
I know we've been terrible to the Jews for 1,000 years, but this seems excessive.
All of our souls have value before God, and all of our souls can be saved. And so there was a need to invoke these primitive pre-Christian identities and to lean into the idea that it was actually good to be more tribal and less universalistic and to embrace these fundamental differences, not because they exist, but as a reaction to the changing, scary, big, wide world around you. It was something that people were just, all too happy to embrace.
And central to that process is the identification with and the codification of your kind of linguistic group, which ends up becoming, your nation. So it suddenly matters that you are Italian. It stops being the language that you speak, and it becomes the thing that you are.
Yes.
And there's a whole process of codification where Italian, basically, they're just like, hey, you've all been speaking Italian before, now you have to talk like a Florentine person.
Yep.
And everybody in Italy is like, oh, fuck. But, not to get all Neil Postman about this, but it was inevitable that typefaces were going to be a central battleground for that, because language is the binding agent of nationhood in this period is language. And this is coinciding with the age of print, the era where the most efficient way to communicate any idea is through the printed word. And of course, visually representing differences between different languages is quite useful to your political project. And I think that it's also a process that has continued to happen because we are living in a world where we are no longer limited in the way that the Nazis were by the production of physical printing blocks. And now we are living through an explosion of different in every language, of different fonts, which are also, in many cases, part of the same nationalistic process. I mean, Olivia, you lived in Glasgow for many years. Mm-hmm. The visual language of Charles Rennie Mackintosh has ended up being translated into print,
yes,
and then becoming the visual language of Glasgow, and by extension the visual language of the rest of Scotland. It's become a modern, classically Scottish print, even though Charles Rennie Mackintosh was a Scottish guy who saw a bunch of Japanese woodblocks and was like, this is awesome.
Yes, and people still have a very strong reaction, for instance, to what are called Gothic fonts, or sometimes they're called Old English fonts when people use sort of specifically British iterations of them, in that it is still seen as an invective of, return to this period, return to the values of this period.
And it is interesting the way that Gothic fonts and typefaces have continued to have a very, very specific and ironic connotation, because, can you imagine, Olivia, what your reaction would be if you got an otherwise completely innocuous political leaflet through your door that used the Gothic font?
Man.
You'd be like, we need to move. Well, that's about going to do us for another episode of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and if you want, you can leave a Spotify comment, and Olivia might read it out on the podcast.
Yes, and if you liked this episode, let me know. I have probably 5 or 6 more episodes about fonts in me, so, just hit me up. I'll do them if there's interest. No, just kidding. Yes, so, oh, there's so many. Thanks to Mark McBride, who said, I am engaging. We are engaged. Fucking nominative determination, am I right? McBride is engaged.
Well, I don't think that's what he means, but yes.
And thanks to Dave, who says, Olivia, an epidemiologist? ... Vaxxed? No comment!
No, you are vaxxed.
Yeah, but I'm choosing... You're breaking the Hippocratic Oath.
Ugh.
By telling that to the people.
I don't think that's what the Hippocratic Oath is.
Well, I don't know. What did you have to say when you took it?
What?
Didn't they make you take the Hippocratic Oath in primary school?
No?
First, do no harm?
Oh, well, I didn't have to...
I'm joking. I'm joshing you.
I don't understand what the joke is. All right, we need to go. Goodbye.
The joke... Okay. Bye! The joke is just like, what if they made you take the Hippocratic Oath in school?
Until next time. Imagine if you did that instead of the Pledge of Allegiance in American schools. That's like, what if Quakerism had become the dominant religion in America? It would have been that.
Yeah.
Well, until next time, take it easy.
Bosh.